Welcome everybody to the Otago Regional Council Large Scale Environmental Funding Workshop. Libby shortly, and we'll go to Richard in a moment. But my understanding of, my put it in very basic terms in my language, but I think this large scale environmental fund, from a sort of perspective, my own perspective, it's about getting the best bang for our bucks for the environment, getting that best bang for our bucks for our ratepayer, and getting the best bang for our bucks in terms of achieving our overall environmental objectives and vision. So that's sort of where I'm at. But I'll hand over to Richard first if he wants to make any initial comments, and then I'll go to Libby. And if you want, I'm sorry, I can't remember your stuff.
Soraya.
Yes, awesome.
Thanks, Andrew. Libby's going to more on it, but just in terms of process, again, this is one of those, I guess, cornerstone projects, if you like, from previous LTP annual plan. We have had numerous discussions with the previous council. It has been brought up in conversations in the new training in terms of the intent for this fund, and we have picked up some commentary in there around how the council may choose to, if it wants to invest this. And so what we want to do is just come back and test that again before we carry on with the final report that actually sets this thing in train for the future financial year. So that's where we're at. It's another one of those key issues that has gone across the election period, and it's just smart for us to come back and test it with the table before we bring you a paper to discuss and make a decision on. But I'll let Libby explain.
Thank you. So I'm Libby Caldwell, and I'm the manager of the environmental implementation team. And this is Soraya Engelken, and she is project delivery specialist at my team that's been helping to develop up what the large scale environmental fund looks like. So through the long-term plan, the large scale environmental funding of up to $2 million per annum was allocated. And so staff have been working on a model for how the fund could be administered. There were a series of workshops and 2 papers presented to the previous council, and that's detailed in the slides. Councillors are undertaking some work to define some priority outcomes to be delivered, and this fund may be useful to support delivery of these. Staff have given thought to what this process may look like in order to support those priority outcomes. Initial thinking is that the process would move away from a contestable fund to a more targeted negotiated process. It's proposed that the fund is administered through 3 stages. Stage 1 is for council to identify the priorities. Once this is completed, staff can support identifying groups who may be able to deliver on these priorities, and groups can also approach us to advise how they can achieve priority actions or outcomes. This would be similar to a tender process, and council would approve any groups that are to be selected to deliver this work after proposals have been received and assessed. Staff would then administer funding agreements and ensure any milestones and final reports are being delivered. So this presentation is to test this thinking, as Richard said. And following this presentation, it's proposed that a paper be brought back to council to seek endorsement of the final process, the fund timeline and the communications plan. And we're really keen to hear any thoughts and feedback about this change in direction to ensure that we're on the right track for the council paper, which is likely to be in April.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you, Libby. Can I just note that is the Pleasant River catchment and north to my property there as well. So sorry, just sharing the local knowledge if you're unaware of that, where that location is. Anyway, questions and queries. Thank you, Libby, for those initial comments. Is there a particular, someone want to kick this off in terms of, and I just tried to make that point at the start. I just feel that this is, it's a wonderful opportunity to be able to support environmental enhancement throughout Otago. And I suppose we're stepping into a much larger commitment financially as compared with the Eco Fund, but it is a slightly different purpose because the criteria and funding model is a little bit different, to say the least. And yeah, we're looking to make sure that we get this right going forward. Any comments? Any thoughts? Any concerns? Alan?
I think this approach is very promising and good that this has come back. I mean, the previous council had many times discussing this and it's coming along. Yeah, I think that approach is good. I guess a couple of questions would be good perhaps to flesh out, and I must admit I have not reread every attached paper, though I have read them in the past. The first step about identifying the priorities, just be good to have about clarity about how we could possibly go about that. And I know, of course, we have in some areas catchment action plans to draw on, and I know there's a great deal of knowledge amongst council. And I suppose also the second question was, and maybe it wouldn't arise, what if we have a priority, something to be done in a particular area where there doesn't appear to be a suitable group established there already? Maybe that won't happen, but it just could. But first of all, about identifying priorities and further ideas on that.
Yes, maybe I'll jump in. So the comment around priorities, we have a number of priorities through existing strategic directions, but we also know that through the conversation that's been happening post the decision made at the Cromwell meeting, that there is a subgroup and then a full councillor discussion coming up to talk about, I guess clarifying priorities for the next 12 to 24 months. And that might give us as staff better direction around what are your top of mind things for this next 24-month period. I suspect they will very much align with what we currently prioritise within long-term plan and annual plan and our existing documents. But that's to be seen. That is where we see the ability to identify some of those things that we might look to seek some partnership and investment in to deliver. So that's where the priorities comment came from.
Yeah, okay. I guess I was just thinking for this, a general priority is not what we want. This is going to have to be tied down to something quite specific, but I guess the process will allow that to happen.
Yeah. And sorry, there was a second.
Oh,
I can cover that.
Yeah,
Libby.
So it was about if there's a priority set and there's not a suitable group to deliver on that priority. So there might be an opportunity through funding to support people to be able to be suitable. So and we can also look at doing that through EcoFund and in terms of upskilling groups that might not have a capacity or capability to deliver something that needed to be done. The other thing to test would be if there isn't a group that's interested in it or was able to deliver it, is whether it is an actual priority. So there's probably a bit of work to do once those are developed around, is that a priority for the community as well?
Yeah. Thank you. And I understand, we're thinking long term here. So not everything has to kick in as soon as this gets going. There's time to develop those things.
And just looking to it, that slide 6, we are lucky in Otago to be very well served by a number of very active and capable groups. So I would hope that any gaps we have are relatively few and far between. And we have got, 60 groups identified and potentially others. So we're in a really good space.
Can I just, sorry, just before you go, I'll go, Matt. I think the group, it's a very good point that Alan's made, and I remember we've had presentations over time where all the catchment groups exist, and the likelihood of this funding probably being spent potentially in the areas where there aren't those catchment groups existing. If you look at the map, the most recent map that we had probably a year, 18 months ago, there was probably, I'm just picking, probably 50% of the target that wasn't covered, and most of it was the large hill country properties in Central and the Lakes District, I suppose. But yeah, that's a good point. Sorry, Matt, we're all yours.
Thanks, and thanks for letting me know that that was the mouth of the Pleasant River. I appreciate the geography lesson. Just couple of curiosities. Has consideration been given around in the funding allocation to whether it'll be annual grants made, or be happy to look at multi-year grants, for the administration and application process that's likely to be involved. It's obviously a considerable amount of ratepayer money, but also a considerable amount of trust, outcome available. So are we looking at 1-year grants or 3-year grants? And also in the criteria when allocating funding, is there what consideration around co-funding and commitments from that sort of stuff? Is there anything being looked at there in terms of how that might work?
Thank you, Councillor Hollier. The intention of this fund was to have it covering more than 1 year. So it was looking at long-term environmental outcomes, which we know in most cases we won't get in one funding cycle. So that is one of the things that we were looking at introducing. In terms of the criteria and co-funding, if there was co-funding being provided to support outcomes, that would mean that there's more security for that group to continue on and be sustainable longer term. So they would, in terms of criteria, it would be favourable for them to have that in place and we would score that to reflect that there is co-funding available, because we don't necessarily want groups to be reliant on this fund longer term. And so if there's co-funding around to support activities, then that's a good thing, and that can be reflected in how we assess those applications.
Cool. And might I just add, thanks, Libby. I think it'll be really important in number 3 of the stages around ensuring accountability for reporting and monitoring, that we get the balance right between being overly onerous and very cautious with understanding every dollar that's spent to the public purse, and allowing groups to get on and do the work actually in the field, because the burden of reporting can become excessive. So from my own experience, I've seen a pretty good example, and I think Libby and we had a good chat the other day, but just for the rest of you as councillors, I just hope that we get the balance right in terms of not having the opportunity to dig deeper into people's books and accounts, and if we need to, but don't necessarily require that through the reporting process, because it can become an excessive burden and stops actual environmental outcomes happening. So that was more of a speech than a question. I'll shut up now. Thank you.
Thanks, Matt. Chanel and then Hilary.
Thanks, guys. I think for me, coming on new, I know you guys have done a lot of work on this, especially in what will the framework look like in order to defensively apply this funding. It would be really helpful to see a list of project priorities. We've got the groups, and that was really helpful to see them geographically as well. Just what blue sky thinking, what could our priorities be? And then if there's any indication on those work plans, if there is capacity for central government, MFE. The reason I say this is, from my point of view, this is an amazing opportunity, and it shows a sense of maturity in how we're looking to apply our funds to match large-scale environmental improvements and enhancements. And this is actually where I slightly differ from Matt, because I'm not shying away from increased accountability, reporting, measurables. And I know Matt isn't as well. And I take Matt's point that we don't want to drown groups in needless administration. But I would say that this isn't the Eco Fund. We are being ambitious with the scale and scope of these projects, potential projects. So we do actually have to probably take a more mature look at how we're going to collect our data, what we're going to do with the data, all that stuff, the science side of things, and just ensuring from a accounting point of view just general good business practice, and I'm not saying that that doesn't exist or that it's not going to be planned for, but I think with a fund this size, if we want it to be successful and endure, we do have to really take on board those points that came in the report. Like we have to show some real maturity around this. This is a business case. This isn't necessarily, this is quite separate from the eco fund as it is intended. I just think it's important to remind and anchor people and that we've got a very large opportunity here and we need to be quite precise on how we execute it. That's even.
Thank you. Hillary.
I think this is exciting. And I think it's going to be really good. And I'm hoping that it's will enhance our ability to work with communities where they want to achieve outcomes, and we can jointly, in some fashion, we can help fund them and on the basis of the priorities we've made. And what I also particularly like that council staff have provided us with some information that will help us when we're looking at what we think are our priority areas for the next couple of years. We can look at these things and have those in the back of our mind when we're thinking of priorities. Dealing with, at some level, Chanel's question, that the proposal of how they get carried out is, this is the first step, the pre-step that we hadn't even put in as a step, which is you giving us the help of this information to start this process off. We can then look and start developing our priorities. We then propose to come back to staff to say, will these work, you know, give us some feedback about how we would, barriers to doing it and things, and develop processes that will help make our priorities work, and in many cases, hopefully, or whatever, we can put this fund to use by working with the communities through this fund. And then as we develop that, it'll develop the what sort of checks and balances need to be made in there, because during that process we will figure out if our priority is to do something that will have, what are we trying to achieve, what would it look like, how often would we need to report back to see whether we're actually achieving whatever it is. If there's somebody who's applied for the environmental fund to do it, what we need from them to report in, and sometimes it might be 3 monthly and sometimes it might be, you know, so those processes will be something that the staff is very good at doing and can be developed, and Chanel could be watching how those are developed and having her talents with and on the way through with those things, especially with her audit and risk hat on. So I just think the whole thing's exciting, really, and allows staff to do what they, I don't know what they do best because they do all sorts of things well, but to give us that information, the knowledge that staff have about what community things are out there and whatever, and to work with staff to develop our priorities and with our knowledge to put the community contributions in there, and hopefully we can all work together with those. So I just want to say good on your staff for getting to this point. We need to do our bit next, and then we'll be developing through there, and it's just can only be good.
Thank you. Apologies, Neil. That's all. I'm all yours. You had a question?
I do. Yes, no, I thought I was meant to offer a noisy cheer. I'm sorry about that. So quite distracting. Obviously, being a bit new to packing this up when it's about to get pretty close to implementation, I've got two questions, and one is that in terms of the environmental groups that have been identified, I assume that's not the exhaustive list of who's eligible going forward. And is there any concerns about some gaps? When I look at the map, you look at there's some areas where there's not too many. I'm assuming that'll be in some way thought about going forward. And then I also assume and hope that with this fund here, that there's a whole of other funders as well that will be supporting some very similar organisations. And what I know from experience with some of those funders is that you've got to be careful that what you give them then doesn't set you up to sort of support them over there. So I encourage and hope that we're going forward, part of the process will ensure that we are talking to those other funders, because it gets very awkward when one group says yes, the other one says no, and then the projects don't go ahead. It's not about colluding or anything like that. It's about making sure that we get in the right space. So just stuff that I hope that going forward we'll think about. I'm not saying we're not going to, because I don't know, but just thought, well, if I don't raise it now, I don't.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. Now, I think that's the probably one of the key positives I see out of the slight shift that's being made is that I see this as a far more flexible process where there's less risk of us running our process to an outcome and then finding parallel funding conversations have gone off in a different direction. This is more, identify a priority, identify some groups and sit down and have a conversation about how we get the best result. And that would include other funders. And so all of those things can come in the mix and be more of a conversation than a linear, you submit an application, we assess it, one chance, yes or no. And there's a lot of balls in the air.
So I guess what I take from that is that ORC is not just a funder; it's maybe in the work, and other funders will not be. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Neil. Gretchen.
I think setting what the outcomes are that we want will be pretty basic. We want enhancement of the environment, and generally that will be biodiversity, and it often is the spin-offs that come from that as well, like water quality or whatever. But the reality that we've got is that we're Otago. We've only got a limited amount of people and we know our area. We need to be thinking exactly responsibly with this money. So we need to be getting actual outcomes on the ground with this. We know that. So we also need to be thinking that this is the first time that we've ever done this. So we don't need to get too overcomplicated, I don't think. We just want to get some surefire, successful outcomes invested in the first few years. And we don't actually know the future of regional councils or the entire environment beyond that. So let's not overcomplicate would be my advice or thinking. Sorry, it's not a question, but yeah, we don't need to get too complicated, but we do need to absolutely get bang for buck and outcomes on the ground. We also need to support our community groups who've been doing this work. We don't need to totally redesign what they want to achieve or tell them, right, sorry, you've been doing this, but we actually need you to be doing this, because that's not what it's about either. Because to get that bang for buck, we need to be supporting them and their aspirations too, and that's going to drive the snowball effect and all that stuff, and other funders and all that sort of thing. What is our first step? We've got some amazing projects already on the ground. We need, I think, a proven track record happening for the investment in the first few years. So I hear about the business case, and if you were setting up a good business proposal, you would want a track history, because we need a sure bet, I think. Yep.
Thanks, Gretchen. Matt. Can you hear me, Matt? We're all yours.
Might be muted.
He's muted.
Yeah.
I think you're muted.
I was just changing to my AirPod thingamajiggies and they weren't talking to my computer fast enough. Hey, just to touch, sort of close a loop there between Neil's point about there being a number of areas that, don't have a lot of groups going on. I think that actually combines a little bit with what Gretchen was talking about in terms of if we demonstrate some success and some wins, and I think that should be part of of the funding agreement that goes with any group that gets support is going, hey, look, you agree to, letting us as ORC leverage your successes to showcase other people, because I think when others see that what's possible and what's achievable, then other groups will either start up in new places or existing groups will expand into those areas that are looking a bit short on the map. So I think it's a positive opportunity for in many ways here, and yeah, absolutely. And certainly, Chanel, I'm not disagreeing with you at all, but thank you for raising it. The checks and balances absolutely need to be there. I'm just making sure we don't get too carried away with spreadsheets that are too onerous. So we're all on the right wavelength, I'm sure. But yeah, thanks very much, Libby. It looks great.
Thanks, Matt. Any other queries, Gary?
Apologies in advance. I really don't like where we're going with this. I don't like us choosing the priorities and then narrowing the availability to certain groups. This is ratepayers' money gathered from everybody on a yearly basis, a substantial amount of money. If you look at the benefit cost analysis, I think if you were to apply it to each of the projects that come through the Eco Fund, possibly the smaller the project, the better the benefit cost analysis would be. I do agree that the Eco Fund is too low and we've always needed a higher upper amount, but by limiting it to certain priorities suddenly means it's not available to everybody. And I think in a very short period of time, we could end up burning the support of the ratepayers by our choosing and narrowing of these projects. I mean, look at the amount of community groups we've identified already. And then $2 million is not a lot of money. These groups most likely have structures in place that handle administration for them to varying extents. I think we get far better bang for buck from those small groups applying into the Eco Fund. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't have $2 million available, but I think it should be available to everybody and available on a case-by-case basis in a process like the Eco Fund. I think we're just overcomplicating it, and we really run the risk of ending up with pet projects only aligned with council, very much unaligned with a lot of the rest of our ratepayers, and we'll lose their support.
Can I just ask you a question, Gary? Would a compromise be that we had a hybrid scenario where you could consider both? So in other words, community-led, with the focus certain priorities, projects, versus a council-led with priorities and projects.
All options on the table. I mean, the Eco Fund process is a very robust process, very fair process, and it puts in place a lot of really good stuff. This would too, and we've done it to death because we've done this over and over and over again. We have to get to a point of what we're going to do because we're rating for this money and taking it. But it needs to be available to all.
Okay, point taken. Okay.
Thank you. Look, this has always been complicated. I think the first meeting I had in the law office was giving away someone else's money, and what I was installed in there, it is one of the hardest tasks you do. So I don't take this lightly, and by the very nature it has to be complicated because you're taking someone else's and putting it into something else. I'm interested in, we've got capacity out there as one of the criteria, and I know some areas, doesn't matter if you're talking about the Lawrence area or the Catlins, are bereft of capacity and human capacity. They don't have enough people to be able to do some of this stuff. I see some groups up here that are really well organised because they've been really well funded in the past, but they don't necessarily have the biggest problem, or they may have overcome some of the problems and actually the challenge is how do they keep growing, and they've done amazing work, but it's the maturity of those that have had the advantage already of that investment that almost makes them easier to invest in, but not necessarily getting the biggest bang for your buck. And I'm not quite sure how we fix that. The groups working across Otago, I really would like to see the Seven Runaka in there and DOC being partnered up, because I think partnering with DOC, especially in areas like Catlins, which is substantially owned by them, and actually forestry companies, are something that we should be looking at. It's not a negative, it's just saying that I think they're missing. I'm really worried about the scale of some of these operators that aren't, in my head, at large scale. Just saying, I think they're small scale that will be really important in their areas, but they're not large scale projects. I think we haven't got that scale sorted yet, and I'm meaning at large catchment scale, not small catchment scale. So I just wanted to say that. And I think if you only look at priorities, you're not looking at opportunities. Because priorities are to fix the problem, but there are some things that we could be saying, how do you get the biggest wetland development in Otago, for example, which would take you to a very different space than looking at a problem necessarily. So I think there's other questions that we need to be asking in that mix. But also how do you ensure that there's a spread right around Otago?
Thank you. Hilary.
I think some of these comments are useful for us going into our working out as councillors what priority things we're aiming for in the next couple of years. And I think Kate's sort of reminder that when we say priorities, that doesn't mean that we're eliminating opportunities. Opportunities can be priorities. So that's a good reminder that what we're doing there. But the idea of producing priorities isn't to say, here's all the community groups that we could give money to, how do we give money to each of them, or cover all the groups. It may be some areas we think of as it have got a priority need and other areas don't have a priority need that we need to deal with, or that is being dealt with in a different way. We are not the Otago Community Trust. We are not put on this earth to give other people's money away. We are on this earth to achieve environmental outcomes, and we need to figure out which priorities we have, because we can't do everything all over the place. So it's not, to me, it's not a focus on whether we're being fair to community groups. It's focus on what we want to achieve, and in some cases we can get together with communities and achieve those, and they may be catchment groups or other, I don't think they have to be. There's all sorts of different ways we can achieve what we think are the priorities for using ratepayers' money in Otago, but it's not trying to be fair to community. That's not where I think this fund should be coming from, and we just can't, once we go down that rabbit hole, it is a rabbit hole, because we are then trying to be fair to people rather than us prioritising what we can do with the remaining time available to us. So I think we need to anyway, we'll see what happens with when we get together and how this conversation can inform that getting together as councillors and figuring out what the most important things we can be doing in the next couple of years is.
Thanks, Hilary. Chanel.
Sorry, I'm just mindful of time. In my mind, for example, you could do a 6-year estuary restoration project. You would have up in the East Coast Taipiriti Committee, you would have Puketaraki, you would have Moraki, you would have Otago University and Marine Science Department. We've got marine reserves coming up that way. You've got the Pleasant River catchment work that's been done. Let's not limit ourselves. But I would say that I do think there's a bit of a what's the word? I feel like you're not quite sure what your eco fund does, and we definitely don't know what we want this fund to do. And I'm not saying that's a negative, but these are things that really need to be tidied up. And I know we're going to be doing eco fund review after, so that's really great. we really do need to have everything everyone's brought up today has been bang on. We have to answer those questions and set some parameters. But at the same time, we could really make this money work a lot harder in conjunction with other people's money.
Thanks, Chanel. Any other comments? We've given it a fairly good old crack, I think. I'm not surprised with the diverse views around the table, because every time we have this discussion about this particular fund, we get a broad spectrum of views, which is healthy because we want to get this right. And we're stepping, as I said in the beginning, we're stepping into a space. It is a new fund, and it's trying to achieve a new purpose. So, yeah. So, a question for you, Libby, and you can answer it if you wish. Have you had enough guidance from the elected arm? Have you got any more questions for the elected arm? You had a slide up there before, the next steps. Do you feel you're well enough informed to be able to bring a paper back to council for us to decide? Because obviously you will have some options, I imagine, on whether it's having developing priorities. We've heard different views on that topic. Whether it's we try and identify a spread across the region. We've had different views on that topic. So, yeah.
I think there is enough information. It'll be useful to, once you've had your workshop together on the 18th of February, to understand what those priorities might be, and then that will help inform the next steps for this fund. I think that will help, but there's probably a few different options we need to present in our paper, that's fine, we can do that. But I think that first step is that it's your workshop on the 18th, and then understanding what the priorities are that fall out of that, so that we can help try and support those.
Thank you. Anything you wanted to add, Richard?
No, I think that was useful. I suppose what I'd reflect on is probably to you, Andrew. We're never going to come up with a process that keeps everybody happy. Mm-hmm. So we'll try and balance that. That need for. I suppose one of the things at top of my mind is clarity for our community. There are a number of, we don't have many public come and watch our workshops. We've got a couple here today, which is great. So there is a lot of interest in this process, because it's been talked about for some time. So whatever we come up with, we need to be able to communicate really clearly how ORC is going to administer this process and engage with the groups that want to get on and do the work. So, this needs to be top of mind when we come back with this, but we'll go away and do some work on it and try and refine something that's nice and clear. There will need to be a couple of options in there, as there always is, but I think we got enough out of today to be able to distill it into something that should give us a good outcome.
Thanks, Richard. If there's no further discussion, thank you very much to everybody for their contribution. I'm now just going to turn to Alan to finish up with closing karakia. Thanks, Alan.
Will do. Ko mutu a mata mahi mo tēnei wā, manaki te mai mata katoa o mata hoa, o mata whānau, ai ki te aorangi. Our work is finished for the moment. This is our colleagues, our families, and I guess I mean our work in this group is finished, and there'll be plenty going on outside of this.
Well done. Thank you.